Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today we have our final roster breakdown for the teams competing in the Western region for 2023. That is the LA Valiant, the Los Angeles Valiant. They competed last year in the Eastern region, so while the Dallas Fuel are moving to the Eastern region for 2023, the LA Valiant are moving back to the Western region. Presumably because of the situation in China where the game isn't out. And so I think they realize that realistically the best thing financially is just move the team back west and kind of sign a roster that way. So that's why they're here at the end instead of kind of where the other kind of Western region teams would have been earlier. Because their record last year was 7-17, so better than the likes of Paris and New York and Vancouver. But like I said, they're in the Eastern region, so a little bit different there. But 7-17, minus 27 differential. They finished 7th in the Eastern region. They were the bottom team. Never really cracking into the top 4, though there were definitely times where they looked better than the likes of Chengdu and Guangzhou and Hangzhou. But there was always 3 teams that kind of looked better than them. But all in all, a decent season from them last year, especially compared to their 2021 campaign. Moving to 2023, very, very new look, of course, as they go from east to west. They go from a Chinese, predominantly Chinese and Korean roster to a fully North American roster. So throw it up here on the screen. You can see it. They have Seeker, Nos, or Nos, Krawi, Liar, Paintbrush, and CJ. It's a very interesting roster here. Little bit of a fun thing for me that I've actually gotten to see this roster play because I'm recording this in the middle of the Pro-Am. So you're seeing it after the Pro-Am is over, but the Pro-Am is ongoing as I am recording this. So I have a little bit more insight into this roster, having gotten to see them play a bit, and you'll get to see some of that gameplay here. But let's jump in, let's dive in, and let's talk about this Valiant roster. And I'm just going to start with the DPS. I think they are the 2 best kind of places to start. To me, the damage really is kind of the key to this roster success, and that is because I think the really big star on this team in terms of kind of the best performing player based on what we've seen in the past is Seeker. Of course, Seeker spent time last year with the Boston Uprising and looked good in the time that we saw him. He didn't play a ton last year because he wasn't eligible until pretty late in the season, but he did play and he did look pretty good. I thought he was a very solid player. Large enough for his hit scan. I think Cassidy is probably his best hero, but he's also going to give you your other hit scans like Widow and Ash. He'll play some Sojourn. So he's going to be the primary hit scan player for this team. And he is alongside Nos, or Nos. Like I said, I don't know exactly how to pronounce it. I believe it's Nos, though. And Nos is going to be your primary flex DPS player. Stuff like Genji, stuff like Pharah, stuff like Mei. He plays Tracer as well, so you kind of know what you're getting. Seeker, I think, also plays Tracer, so you have at least some flexibility here with this duo. Like, they're not the most flexible duo in the league, but they can play quite a bit of kind of the rotation. And I think Seeker really is kind of the star that I'm looking at on this kind of damage duo. I think if Seeker is able to kind of be given that opportunity to pop off, I think if you invest in him pretty well, he can lead you to a lot of wins, especially against some of the kind of mid to low table teams. That's kind of where I think this team will really be able to kind of unleash Seeker on the world. Like I said, Pro-Am's ongoing right now, but in the Pro-Am, their group consisted of teams like the Vegas Eternal, Saints, which is Maryville. They had Atlanta in their group. They had London in their group. So a somewhat tough group, to be honest with you, because you have the most Overwatch League teams of any group with 4, and then the best team out of the contenders kind of group. But they played pretty well from what I've seen so far. Like I said, they have 1 game left as of me recording this, so kind of keep that in mind. But Seeker, to me, is the most impressive player so far. He has been the consistent best part of this team, as we've seen so far in the Pro-Am. And I think that what you get out of him is very consistent high-level play in that hit scan role. So I'm very intrigued to kind of see how he does as the season progresses. I thought he was on a very good streak at the end of the year last year. Comes back in now in the Valiant, and I think he is going to be the big piece here. I think Nos has a very strong playstyle as well. I think he's very good as well. But I definitely think that he is going to predominantly play second fiddle to Seeker unless you get a meta where you kind of really need a strong Genji or something like that. But I was very impressed by how smart Nos played. I thought that he, generally speaking, played kind of good counter picks. The game against the Vegas Eternal, to me, was really one I thought the Valiant really showed kind of what they're capable of. It was a big win for them, but also I felt like through that game, they were just consistently outplaying the Vegas Eternal in the DPS picks. They were making smarter plays, and it was announced or revealed by the team after that game that they'd only been basically scrimming or playing together for about a week and a half before the Pro-Am, so I think they have a lot of room to grow. I think they'll get better over time, and so I look at the team and I think they're in a pretty solid spot, all things considered, and I think that when you look at what this team is potentially going to be in the kind of year, I think that they have potential to kind of improve and get better as time goes on. The next player on this team is Krawi. Of course, he spent some time last year with the Vegas Eternal, or the Paris Eternal at the time. And he comes in as the team's only tank player. Certainly a bit of a potential kind of weakness on this team, having just one tank. Krawi is predominantly an off-tank player, so we've seen a lot of Ramatra out of him, because Ramatra is very, very meta right now. We saw some D.Va, some Doomfist, stuff like that, but he was very, very, very heavily favoring the Ramatra. It's a lot of rush right now, so that kind of makes sense. We saw him play some Junker Queen last year. I thought he was fine. Put some Doomfist in the qualifiers for the Pro-Am, and it was fine as well. I think Krawi has potential to kind of definitely be in a... I think right now, he's on a spot that I honestly like better than him on Vegas last year. I just thought him getting thrown into that roster last year just did not work very well. Some of it was on that team. I think a lot of that is showing kind of the way that roster has still struggled so far in the Pro-Am. I think when you look at Krawi and what he has really been able to do and bring to this Valiant team, I think he's playing much better than we saw from him last year. So very intrigued to see kind of how he goes. It'll be interesting to see what happens when we get into the regular season, when we get into different meta, most likely. If it's a really heavy Winston meta, if it's a really heavy Rhine meta, how well will he perform? If it's a heavy Rhine meta, do we see still that kind of option for some teams to run Ramatra? I think it's one of those things that's very interesting, kind of an aside here a little bit, but I think it's interesting that we're kind of seeing how teams that have players who are, off tanks by trade from Overwatch 1, a lot of them tend to favor Ramatra in these rush comps. I think it's just because his skill set kind of translates a little bit better to off tanks. He's a little more aim oriented than Reinhardt is. You kind of have a little bit more poke ability that you don't really get as much as Reinhardt. So it's interesting to kind of see that dynamic. Sure, the first time there's been a kind of secondary option to Reinhardt, poor man's rush, as Hadi was calling it when you're running the Ramatra. So it's interesting. I've been liking what Krawi has done on the Ramatra. I think the Valiant have looked better than I expected them to at this point in time in the Pro-Am. Like I said, still early. The season hasn't really begun yet. But I do think Krawi impressed me more than I expected to. I thought he was going to be pretty bad. I'll be honest with you. I didn't think he looked very good on the Eternal last year, but I do think he looks significantly better now. I like the pieces around him. I think that there's a little bit more play-making ability right now on the Valiant than what we saw last year on the Eternal, and I think that has been helping Krawi quite a bit. So that's nice to see. My big concern with him, like I said, is main tank heroes. Can he play the Winston, the Ball, the Rhine if we get really heavy metas on those heroes? But as long as there's options where he can play stuff like Doomfist or Ramatra, D.Va, whatever, I do think he's going to be a very, very serviceable and, kind of consistently, performing tank, so long as kind of he can play what's kind of in his comfort. And I think that's really where I think this team's lack of flexibility could hurt them. But I think in the metas where they can really kind of do their most work, I do think there is potential for this team to do pretty well. Because I think there's decent scouting on this roster. There's decent pieces on this roster. Let's move on to the support line, which is half of this roster. It's going to be CJ and Liar the whole season. Don't let the presence of Paintbrush fool you. He is on this roster to be a player coach. He's not going to get playtime on this roster. He shouldn't really get playtime on this roster. I don't expect him to get playtime on this roster. Maybe a little bit if it's absolutely necessary. But I think they know what he is on this team, and I think he's predominantly going to be their coach. I don't know if they have a head coach. There's no announced head coach for this roster. So right now, my assumption is that Paintbrush might be their only coach. And if he is, that's kind of the role that I expect him to fill. I don't expect him to play much. So they're going to rely heavily on Liar and CJ. I want to start with CJ because we've seen him play very, very well so far in the Pro-Am. I think he's a very, very, very big playmaker on the Kiriko. That is a very, very strong hero. If you can kind of find picks and kind of find success on the hero, I think you have a lot of potential to really kind of be that secondary piece. And I think that's part of why CJ works so well on this roster, because you have Seeker as well. And when you have CJ able to make plays and Seeker able to make plays, it kind of helps alleviate the load off of both of them, which also helps players like Krawi and Nas and Liar also kind of find their impact, because you have players in CJ and in Seeker who are able to kind of make those plays and get those picks. So I do think CJ is probably the number 2 most important player on this roster, arguably the most important because support is such an important role. But if Kiriko kind of shifts out of meta, it'll be interesting to see how much of his impact translates as well at the Overwatch League level on heroes like Zen and Ana and Baptiste, if that's kind of where he's to play. But I've been very impressed with him so far. Liar, to me, has been pretty solid. I don't think he's done anything too incredible. There's nothing that I've really looked at and been like, this guy's really kind of wowing me and impressing me with the way he's playing. But he's a solid main support player. He's pretty flexible as well. He can play some flex support as well. So you have a dual flex here with Liar and CJ, which is nice. And I guess like if you really need a main support player, like if Mercy is like super hard meta for some reason, Paintbrush could probably come in for that if you needed it. But at the very least, you have Liar, who is playing that main support role, is comfortable in heroes like Brig. We've seen him play some Lucio, but also like Baptiste and whatnot. So I do like this support line. I think that the presence of Paintbrush will help the support line as well, even if just for coaching and whatnot. And so that's kind of why I like it. I wish this roster would add more pieces. I doubt they will. It's the LA Valiant. They tend to like to run kind of cheaper on the roster, but they did have quite a few pieces last year. I think they understand kind of potentially that there is reason to do that, but I don't think it is based on the kind of current financial situation surrounding the league. I don't really expect this team to add any more pieces. If they did, my big wish would be a main tank player, someone who plays those kind of main tank heroes. There's people out there potentially, but that's really what I think they would benefit the most from. I think generally speaking, support line, they're fine. Damage duo is solid all around. You could maybe add another hit scan player, but I don't really think it's a necessity. I think you're fine as you are right now, and so I don't really expect it to happen. All in all, I do think this Valiant team is certainly impressing me so far based on what we've seen from them. I think that they'll do okay this year. I don't expect them to be competing among some of the best teams, but when you look around kind of that middle to bottom of the Western region with teams like the Washington Justice, the New York Excelsior, the Vegas Eternal, the Vancouver Titans, that kind of area, even potentially teams like London, or Toronto, depending on kind of the meta, stuff like that. Gladiators, whatever, Battle for LA will be cool to see again. That's kind of where the Valiant can kind of look to try to kind of step up, get those kind of wins. I don't expect them to have any upset wins against your top level teams, but I certainly think there is potential for this Valiant roster to definitely make a kind of push as the year progresses. I think they'll only get better as time goes on because they'll have more time to synergize with each other. So I think it's a very interesting roster. I think it's really not what I expected out of this roster so far. I kind of expect them to come into the Pro-Am and just be the worst team ever. I mean, they did lose to Saints, but Saints is a very good team that's been together for a while. So in that way, you have kind of more synergy, but it was a very competitive series, the Saints. It was a competitive series between them. Well, pretty one-sided between them and Vegas. But it was pretty competitive for this team kind of throughout this Pro-Am so far. And so I'm excited to kind of see where they go because they have caught my attention. I do like the Valiant being back in the Western region. I missed them, and I wish we could have had more of them over the past couple of years. But they're back now, and so I will enjoy it while it lasts. That's it for this one. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below on this Valiant roster. And if you want more videos like this in the future, consider liking and subscribing. We're going to take a quick break from roster breakdowns on Wednesday to talk about the Pro-Am a bit, but there will be another roster breakdown on Friday, so don't you fret. Don't you worry. I'm not going anywhere for too long. That's it, though. Once again, hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.